Imagine living in a time when spirituality, once central to the life of a people, became merely a memory. This was the backdrop of Israel in the 8th century BC, when the prophet Hosea received his calling. The nation that was supposed to be the example of a relationship with God was completely immersed in idolatry. The people bowed before idols of stone and wood, seeking protection, harvests, and prosperity. It was as if the God who had delivered them from Egypt had been forgotten. Society was divided. The rich grew richer at the expense of the poor, corruption ruled the courts, and morality was distorted. Treacherous political alliances replaced trust in God, and daily life was marked by a disconnect between professed beliefs and actual living. In this scene of decay, God called Hosea. It was not a common calling, one limited to words and speeches. God had an extraordinary plan for Hosea's life, something that would not only proclaim his message, but embody his love and sorrow. Consider how this echoes today. We live in an era where God often seems forgotten. People seek answers in material things, in empty promises, or in ideologies that leave an even greater void. Corruption, inequality, fragile alliances that break at the slightest impact. Does this sound familiar? What seemed like an impossible task became Hosea's life mission, to demonstrate through his own story the enduring love of God. God didn't just want to send a warning. He wanted to reach the people's hearts, helping them understand how deeply his love remained, even in the face of constant rejection. This is where Hosea's role becomes so special. He wasn't just a prophet who spoke, he lived the message. Imagine being called by God to do something so unusual that no one around you would understand. For Hosea, God's calling was a shock. He was to marry Gomer, a woman known for her unfaithfulness. Now think about the situation. Hosea was a respected prophet. His life was dedicated to representing God's holiness before a rebellious people. But God asked him to do something that seemed to contradict all of that. The command was clear. Go, marry a promiscuous woman and have children of unfaithfulness, because the land is guilty of spiritual adultery in departing from the Lord. Hosea 1:2. This instruction wasn't about approving or condoning Gomer's behavior. It was about creating a living image of God's relationship with Israel. Just as Gomer would be unfaithful to Hosea, Israel was being unfaithful to God, turning to other gods and rejecting his covenant. We can imagine Hosea's questions. Why? Why him? How could he fulfill this role? Yet he obeyed. He married Gomer, accepting not just the woman, but also the symbolic weight their union would carry. Now think about the power of this story applied to daily life. How often do we find ourselves in situations we don't understand, called to do something that seems senseless or even humiliating? It could be a difficult career, a relationship that demands sacrifices, or even the decision to forgive someone who deeply hurt us. Like Hosea, we are challenged to trust God even when the plan seems incomprehensible. In Hosea's marriage, there was a powerful message. True love is not about convenience. It is about commitment. God didn't choose to abandon Israel. Even when his people turned away from him, he chose to persist, to love, and to redeem. Hosea and Gomer became a reflection of this. Their union was a living reminder to Israel that even amid spiritual unfaithfulness, God's heart sought reconciliation. The prophet Hosea embarked on a journey of pain and unconditional love, a journey that would reveal to the world how far God is willing to go to bring his children back home. And so, we begin to see the unfolding of Gomer's unfaithfulness, a deeper reflection of Israel's situation. Hosea's marriage to Gomer did not take long to fulfill the symbolic purpose planned by God. Despite the commitment made, Gomer did not remain faithful. She left Hosea, giving herself to other lovers. It was a betrayal that not only caused emotional pain, but also called Hosea's prophetic mission into question. Imagine the pain of this moment. Hosea was not just a betrayed husband, he was an obedient servant of God who knew his life was a reflection of divine love. Gomer's unfaithfulness symbolized exactly what Israel was doing to God. While God had rescued Israel from slavery in Egypt, made a covenant with them, and poured out blessings, the people continued to seek foreign gods like Baal and political alliances with pagan nations. How often in our lives are we like Gomer? We seek comfort in fleeting things, place our hopes in material resources, human relationships, or even in our own strength. Just as Gomer strayed from Hosea, we often stray from God's path, choosing our own interests instead of fully trusting in his love. Hosea, however, did not give up. His response to Gomer's unfaithfulness was not one of vengeance or rejection, but of persistence and love. He understood that his life symbolized God's relationship with Israel. Rather than abandoning Gomer, he remained willing to rescue her, even while she lived in betrayal. This attitude forces us to reflect: how do we respond when we are betrayed or hurt? Human nature cries out for justice, but Hosea's example points to something greater, a love that transcends pain. It is not a passive love that ignores wrongdoing, but an active love that seeks reconciliation and redemption. Gomer's unfaithfulness also led to the birth of her children, whose names were carefully chosen by God to convey prophetic messages. Each child represented a declaration about the condition of Israel and what was to come, something we will explore further. For now, the image of Hosea seeking Gomer, even in her betrayal, leaves us with an inescapable lesson. True love is unconditional. It is not based on the other person's behavior, but on a firm decision to stay, rescue, and restore. And so we move toward the most powerful moment of this story: Gomer's rescue and the love that surpasses all betrayals. Gomer had gone too far. After abandoning Hosea, she ended up in a state of total degradation. Her pursuit of other lovers left her in ruins, both emotionally and physically. The woman who once lived in the home of a prophet now found herself at the mercy of exploitation and humiliation, and yet Hosea did not give up on her. God spoke to him again, commanding something even more remarkable: "Go, show your love to your wife again, though she is loved by another and is an adulteress. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods." Hosea 3:1. Imagine this scene. Hosea doesn't just obey, he goes to where Gomer is. She isn't just emotionally lost, she has been sold as a slave. He finds her in a market, stripped of all dignity, in full view of everyone. Many men might have been there to buy her, but Hosea was there to redeem her. The price of her redemption is symbolic. He pays 15 pieces of silver and a measure of barley. It wasn't a high price, reflecting how devalued she had become. Yet Hosea paid whatever was necessary to bring her back. This act of rescue wasn't just a gesture of mercy, it was a powerful demonstration of sacrificial love. Now, think about the impact of this on our daily lives. How often do we find ourselves like Gomer, lost, humiliated, so far from God that we feel we no longer have value? And yet, God doesn't just seek us, He pays the price to rescue us. On the cross, Jesus did what Hosea did for Gomer, but infinitely greater. He gave His very life to redeem the lost, paying the price for a love we can never fully repay. As Hosea brought Gomer back home, he made a renewed covenant with her. He didn't humiliate her or publicly accuse her. Instead, he offered her a fresh start, reaffirming that she would live with him in faithfulness. Just as Hosea gave Gomer a second chance, God offered Israel, and offers us, the opportunity to return to Him, no matter how far we've gone. This is the essence of divine love. It doesn't ignore wrongdoing, but seeks restoration. It's a love that crosses the barriers of shame, guilt, and pain to bring the lost back home. At the end of this chapter, we see the central point of this story. God's love is unconditional, and His grace is available even to the most broken. Beyond Hosea's marriage to Gomer, God used the prophet's children as a means to deliver powerful messages to the people of Israel. Each child born from this union carried a name filled with prophetic meaning, reflecting both the spiritual state of the nation and God's plans for its future. The first child was named Jezreel, a name that evoked dark memories for the Israelites. Jezreel was the valley where King Jehu had shed excessive blood, even though he was an instrument of divine justice, 2 Kings 9-10. By naming the boy Jezreel, God was warning Israel that judgment was coming. The royal lineage would be broken, and the people would reap the consequences of their idolatry and violence. For today, Jezreel reminds us that our choices have consequences. It is a call to reflect on how our often impulsive actions can bring pain to ourselves and others. But as we will see, even the judgment in Jezreel would not be the end of the story. The second child, a daughter, was named Lo Ruhamah, meaning not loved or without compassion. This harsh name signified that God would withdraw his mercy from Israel. The people, who repeatedly rejected divine love, would experience discipline. Think about the impact of this name in a family context. For Gomer and Hosea, naming their daughter, this was a constant reminder of the pain that sin brings to relationships. For us, it serves as a warning. When we distance ourselves from God, we are choosing separation from his protection and grace. The third child, Lo-Ami, carried the most painful message, "Not my people." It was a declaration that Israel had broken its covenant with God so severely that he no longer recognized them as his people, yet even this message had a redemptive purpose. It was not a definitive abandonment, but a call to repentance. How often in our journey do we feel like we have become not God's people, perhaps due to our failures, accumulated mistakes, or the distance we place between ourselves and God? But Hosea's story does not end in rejection. It points to reconciliation. Although Hosea's children's names were warnings, they also carried a thread of hope. God did not pronounce judgment without opening the door to restoration. Jezreel, for instance, not only symbolized judgment, but also a future promise. "I will plant her for myself in the land," Hosea 2:23. God was planning to turn a valley of destruction into a place of rebirth. In Hosea's life, we see how even the most difficult moments can be used to convey profound truths. Even today, the marks of the challenges we face can become messages of hope for those around us. Although the names of Hosea's children seem to signal the end of Israel, God's plan was never to abandon them completely. His judgment had a redemptive purpose, to bring the people back into a true relationship with him. It is in this context that Hosea's message shifts in tone, moving from warning to hope. First, God declares in Hosea 2:14-15, "Therefore, I am now going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. There I will give her back her vineyards and will make the valley of Achor a door of hope." Here, the metaphor of marriage gains new depth. Just as Hosea rescued Gomer and offered her a chance to start over, God promised to rescue Israel, even after their estrangement and unfaithfulness. This passage teaches us something profound about God's character. He is persistent in love. Even when we are unfaithful, he continues to draw us back, offering hope in the midst of chaos. Think of how many times in our lives we feel like we are in the valley of Achor, places of difficulty and despair. Yet God transforms those valleys into doors of renewal. Second, God promises to restore his relationship with Israel, saying, "I will plant her for myself in the land. I will show my love to the one I called not my loved one. I will say to those called not my people, you are my people, and they will say, you are my God." Hosea 2:23. This passage reflects God's restorative grace. He not only forgives, but also restores dignity and identity. For Gomer, this meant being restored as a wife. For Israel, it meant being recognized once again as God's chosen people. And for us, it is a reminder that no matter how far we may stray, God is always ready to call us back home. How often do we face situations that make us feel not loved or not belonging? Hosea's message is clear. God's love is unshakable. He does not define us by our mistakes, but by His promise of redemption. This truth invites us to trust in Him, even when it feels like everything is lost. Hosea's story culminates in a vivid portrayal of God's eternal plan, a love that forgives, restores, and renews. Hosea's commitment to Gomer reflects the new covenant God makes with His people. He not only forgives infidelity, but also transforms betrayal into an opportunity to renew the relationship. This renewed covenant is a powerful reminder for today. No matter where we are on our journey, God is always ready to rebuild what has been broken. Hosea's story is more than an account of Israel's past. It is a timeless message about God's love, which transcends our mistakes and calls us back to Him, no matter how far we may have strayed. But how do we apply these lessons to our daily lives? Just as Hosea sought Gomer, God seeks us even when we turn away. He doesn't wait for us to return perfect. He meets us exactly where we are, broken, wounded, and in need of redemption. This truth challenges us to examine our own relationships. Can we reflect this kind of love? A love that seeks reconciliation, forgives, and is patient even when we are hurt. This lesson also helps us recognize God's love in our lives. How many times has He rescued us when we were in places of darkness? Just as Gomer was brought out of her state of degradation, God does the same for us, transforming what seems lost into something filled with hope. The names of Hosea's children remind us that sin has consequences. When we turn away from God, we feel the weight of that choice, broken relationships, guilt, shame. But just as the meanings of the names changed at the end of the story, God promises to turn the pain of sin into the joy of restoration. In practical terms, this means we are never too far from God. He doesn't just forgive us, He fully restores us, returning the dignity we thought we had lost. How often do we find ourselves in our own valleys of Achor, feeling like there's no way out? Hosea's story teaches us that these moments of difficulty can be transformed by God into opportunities for growth and renewal. It is often in these valleys that we hear God's voice most clearly, calling us to a deeper life with Him. Hosea's story is not just about Israel, it's about each of us. It's about a God who loves us with a persistent and unshakable love, willing to rescue, restore, and transform us even when we feel most unworthy. This story invites us to trust in God's love, to accept His grace, and to allow Him to transform our lives. And as we do so, we are called to reflect this same love in our relationships, becoming agents of reconciliation, forgiveness, and hope. Hosea and Gomer are not just characters from an ancient story. They are reflections of us and of the God who loves us beyond measure. Now I want you to write in the comments, have you ever reflected on the life of the prophet Hosea? Would you have the courage to follow God's will at all costs, even if at first it seemed crazy? I want to know your opinion. May God bless you abundantly. See you in the next video.